Good afternoon, everyone. Anne Sabah here with Neurodiverse Universe Life and Executive Function Coaching. Today, I'm going to be discussing the 7 criteria that are used in the most recent edition of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual number 5, or aka the DSM-5, in how to determine autism in youth or adults. What I'm specifically going to be discussing is I'll go over each of the criteria one by one, and I'm going to specifically be talking about the different ways that they manifest in girls and women, or that they may manifest in girls and women, using myself as an example. The first one is social and emotional reciprocity. And a lot of times people may think, oh, that's somebody who doesn't understand how to have a back and forth conversation with somebody. And while that may be how it manifests, oftentimes that's not the case. A lot of times for me, I do very much know how to and understand the back and forth nature of conversation. What sometimes gets overwhelming for me, I definitely love spending time with my friends and family, and relationships are extremely important to me and always have been. I enjoy spending time with my family and friends, but a lot of times, too many social occasions in one day, in one week, can be too overwhelming for me and leave me tapped of energy. So what I've learned over the years is to, maybe not accept every single offer to hang out. Maybe just, choose very carefully kind of what I want to do so as not to drain my energy and leave me depleted for several days afterwards. It's not that the people themselves drain me. It's just that, sometimes just interaction, or too much of it, too much social interaction can be draining for myself and for folks like me. But does it mean we don't have friends? No, that's one of the biggest fallacies about autistic people, is that we don't have friends and we're not interested in having friends. That's false. So for that, I would say, if you hear that stated, please discard it, because that's nonsense. Okay. And one other thing about the social and emotional reciprocity, with social emotional reciprocity comes conversation. So I do enjoy conversation verbally. I will say, in my humble opinion, I am a much better written communicator than I am spoken word communicator. Why is that? Because when I write or when I type things out, if it's not to my liking as to what I want to say or what I intend to say, I can backspace, I can delete, and I can start again. If I'm speaking, a lot of times, once it's out of your mouth, it's out of your mouth. You can't unsay something. So it's a lot of times, at least for many autistic people that I've talked to, a lot easier to write and a lot easier to text or type or email and so forth. Does that mean we don't like having in-person conversations? No, that's not the case. It's just, where are you better? I'm a little bit better, in my opinion, in written word versus spoken word. I've always, at least since the age of 15, been a poet. And so with poetry, some people can memorize their own poetry. There's very few of my poems that I've written over the past 30 years that I have really been able to memorize. I mean, maybe one or two, but mostly I write it. And then, like, if I'm at an open mic event, I read it. So I'm reading and I'm not relying on my memory to try and do the spoken word that way. I admire folks who can, and there are plenty of them at different open mics that I've been to over the years, and they memorize it and they just can rattle it off without thinking. But most times with me, I've not found that to be the case. That's just me. So that is one other, you know, thing that I wanted to say about that first diagnostic point, which again is social and emotional reciprocity. The second one is nonverbal communication. So that's tone of voice, body language, and how to read those things. Now, I can do that. Did it always come easy? Probably not. Um, I think I used to be more of a literal interpreter as a younger person than I am now. I've learned colloquialisms over the years. So I know if somebody is saying something that is, it might mean something else, but I understand pretty well what it means. Just having been around the folks that are saying those particular things, I know various things. Like for instance, okay, I'm going to date myself, but I'm okay with that. When Michael Jackson came out with the song Bad, he wasn't meaning that he was a bad person. What he was meaning was I'm bad, like I'm fly, I'm cool. And at least I took it to mean that. Or I'm somebody maybe you don't want to mess with, and bad meant good in that scenario. Um so that's one of those things that maybe as a younger person, I still knew it back then, but I had exposure to, folks who may, just speak differently, speak colloquially, and that's cool. And I understood that. But for some autistic people, they might have heard that song and be like, "Oh, is he a bad man? He's saying he's a bad man. Oh my gosh." No, 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 no. No. That's not what he was saying at all. So, that is something that can sometimes be misinterpreted by folks who are on the autism spectrum. Um, I've gotten better over the years, I think, with things like, nonverbal communication, understanding people's uh, body language and things of that nature. But, it's something that doesn't always come naturally to everybody on the spectrum. So that's criteria number 2. Criteria number 3 is relationship management. And that is, for me, how that manifests is, again, I can manage my relationships very well in my life. But to do that, I need tools such as a planner so that I know where I'm going and with whom on any given day. I like kind of knowing in advance, what's going to happen. That helps me a lot. That helps me mentally prepare. It helps me to know that I can leave when I would like to, if I'm feeling like too socially drained and so forth and needing to recharge. So those are things that are important. And so keeping less of a social schedule, so I won't feel so overwhelmed and need so much recovery time. It goes back to area number 1, which is social and emotional reciprocity. So relationship management, I think, it kind of goes hand in hand with number 1. So when I was a younger person, I might pack my schedule and then I would feel just drained. And nobody wants to feel like that. So when you realize that you can't necessarily compete and do so many things one right after the other and not feel depleted, then you stop doing that. So that is something that how it manifests in me and how I've handled it. Number 4 in the criteria is repetitive movement. So some autistic people do what is called repetitive movement or stimming. Stimming is short for, trying to think of the name, it's kind of odd to say it this way, but self-stimulation. So it can be anything from tapping, like tapping on your knee if you're nervous or trying to regulate, your emotions or feelings. Maybe it's clapping, maybe it's flapping like your arms like this. Sometimes I do those things, but usually, unless somebody knows me really well, they probably will not see me do that. Why? Because, well, in polite neurotypical society, things like that are thought of as odd. Well, Are they harmful? That's what one has to ask themselves. I say no. So basically, if you see somebody doing those things, it does not automatically mean that they're autistic, but it may well, they may well be autistic. And, you just have to ask yourself, okay, well, are they maybe sensory overloaded? Maybe they're just trying to calm themselves down or keep themselves on an even keel. And sometimes that's the way they do that. So that may not be how a neurotypical person does it, but that's how a lot of us tend to do it. Now, sometimes this can be, if I'm around, somebody that I know very well, and it's just, them and myself, I might hum low to myself just to self-soothe if I'm feeling overwhelmed, and that usually, that can help me. So that's just that's something about criteria number 4: repetitive movement or repetitive sound, things like that. It's more a self-regulating behavior that can differ from that of a neurotypical individual. Number 5 is sameness, appreciating and wanting sameness in one's life, or being inflexible or less flexible than the average bear, if you will, in one's routine. That is definitely true of me. I live by a planner. I have for at least over 10 years now. To be honest, I don't know how I got through high school or college without one, but somehow I did. I'm very grateful 21 years now after graduating college to have learned and utilized a planner successfully. And that really helps to keep me even keel as far as to keep track of the things I have to do on any given day. Now, where the inflexibility comes in, and I can be flexible, don't get me wrong, but I prefer to know in advance if a plan of mine is going to change. If, for instance, I've planned something with, one of my friends, and then the day of, they're like, oh, okay, I know we were going to go to this restaurant, but we're going to go to this one now. And I'm just like, maybe a neurotypical would be like, oh, okay. Me, I'm like, oh man, I was so looking forward to this other thing. Now, can I adapt? Most times, yes, I can, but it might just take me a minute. It's like, all right, okay, give me a minute. Plan was changed, and now I have to adapt. So give me a moment, and I'll get there with you. But that's kind of, something that may be a little more difficult for autistic people or folks on the spectrum. So that is where that comes in. I can remember as far back as just prior to starting kindergarten, when I moved from the DC metro area to Florida when I was 5. I remember my nephew, or my sister and my 2 nephews who are close to my age came with us to help us move. And my nephew Henry and I are just 9 months apart. So I was outside on the back patio of our new house, and I was playing by myself, and I was kind of, engrossed in playing by myself. And so Henry came out to join me, and I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing out here? And he's like, my mom told me to come outside. And I'm just like, oh, okay. And I was reluctant. Once he was there, I was fine. But for some reason, I was so into what I was doing. Lord knows what it was. I could have been, drawing with chalk or something on the sidewalk on the patio. But, anybody else disrupted me. I don't know. That's kind of how I was. Now, when I started kindergarten, I remember very vividly that we were told to go get our crayon boxes and, line up, and then we were going to go back to our desks and color. And I went to go get my crayon box, and I think it slipped out of my hand and all my crayons fell on the floor. Well, 6-year-old kids being 6-year-old kids in a kindergarten class, they started kicking them around in the line. And I was so upset. And I figured, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get my crayons back. It was so upsetting to me, and I didn't know what to do. And I just was like, ah. And I just, so the teacher just came up to me and was like, are you okay? Are you okay? And I couldn't articulate what was wrong. All I knew was that I was so upset because my crayons had been, kicked all over the place. And I think, finally she understood what was going on and maybe helped me gather them together, and everything was then okay. But things like that are very difficult for autistic people in their youth and, as they get older, into adulthood. A lot of times, if I don't mean to and I knock something over, I can get over that, but man, I'm just like, oh, I did not want to do that. So it's things like that make up, our need or our desire for sameness and inflexibility in our routines. It helps us to do things in a particular order. For instance, like when I make dinner some nights, if my husband comes in and wants to help, like sometimes I have gotten to the point where there's specific things that I'll have him help me do. But for other things, I'm just like, oh, okay, well, let me just be left to my own devices, so to speak, because I can control my own environment and I know kind of how I want to make a certain dish or this or that. So it's much easier for me to just proceed. I so appreciate him wanting to help always. But a lot of times, for certain things, I get very, very, set in my ways, for lack of a better word, because that being said, I can control my own environment. And it helps me, keep order in my own way. Number 6 is restricted interests. For me, as a younger person, I've been into music as long as I can remember, especially rock and roll. And one of my favorite bands, back starting when I was 15 years old, was Pink Floyd. And I could tell you anything you ever wanted to know about that band. And when I'm interested in a subject matter, I delve into it wholeheartedly, and I want to know everything there is to know. And yeah, I mean, maybe neurotypicals feel this way sometimes, but I think that it is much, more common among neurodiverse individuals, myself included, to just delve into areas of interest to them or special interest to them. So I wouldn't call it restricted interests. I wouldn't call it, because I have a wide variety of interests, but the Diagnostic Statistical Manual calls it restricted interest, so that's what we'll call it for today's purposes. But for some people, a lot of times you'll hear like autistic boys might love trains or love cars or something like that, and that may be true. Well, for a lot of autistic women and girls, they're just as obsessive, but they're obsessive about their favorite bands. In my case, their favorite, could be their favorite dolls, their favorite, clothes, makeup, etc. You name it. If they're into something, they're into it 120%. That's just the way they tend to be. So that's where the restricted interest comes from, and that's how it often manifests in people on the spectrum. The 7th and final criteria of autism is hyper or hyposensory reactivity. Now, for me, that is a huge one. That's something where I prefer very soft fabrics as far as the clothing that I wear. I cannot stand tags in the back of my shirts, in the back of, my pants or skirts or dresses, can't stand them. So it's kind of funny. If there's a tag in the back, I try and cut it out without ripping the fabric, but a lot of times you're going to see little tiny holes in the back of a lot of my clothes. That's just the way I am because I cannot stand tags. Can't stand them. Even if there's a little bit left, they drive me insane. So that's one of the things that can be true about people on the spectrum. Another way that this manifests for me is being sensory overloaded. If too many people are talking at once, I can't understand a thing going on. And I'll just be like, I can't understand a word anybody's saying right now. I need you all to speak one at a time, please. Who's first? And it's just, kind of like that. I don't know how I ever made it going to clubs when I was in my late teens, early 20s, because if there was a lot of room to dance and to talk and you could actually hear each other, which was rare, kind of more warehouse style club back in the day, I'd be fine with that. But when it came to everybody packed in like sardines, music turned up to 1,000,000 and you couldn't hear yourself think, I had no interest because you're yelling at the person in front of you. What? What did you say? What did you say? And you can't have a conversation like that. I can't anyway. So that was, and a lot of times if there's, for instance, in my own home, if the TV is on, both my husband and I have to pause it if we want to talk to each other. Because if the TV is going and we're trying to understand what one another's saying, we're not gonna. We can't do it. So that is something that is common among neurodiverse people as well as people on the spectrum. Now, the ways that I've spoken about this can manifest the same in men, but they are ways that often manifest in women. For instance, for sensory or things like that, when you get to know a particular fabric is good and fits you well and doesn't bother you and itch your skin or something, a lot of times you'll just get the same thing. You'll order the same type of shirts or pants or whatever over and over again. I know I do. Order the same shoes if they feel good on my feet and stuff like that. So those are things that are, typically, how things manifest for women and girls on the spectrum. They may not manifest for men in those same ways. Often they don't, but sometimes they do. So I do hope that this gave you an idea of how autism manifests in women and girls. I will say that the way that these things manifest in women and girls is still unbelievably misunderstood, even by clinicians that by definition should understand it. And if you're looking for a formal diagnosis of autism, you have got to be extremely careful and find a clinician that really knows autism backwards and forwards and how it manifests in women and girls. And can they recognize if we are quote unquote masking, which is what we do when we go to work and when we go to school. A lot of times, for instance, when I was in school and also, ever since I've been working, you go in and you're there for the day, you have to handle all the stimuli coming at you, whether you want to or not. So you hold it together somehow, and then you either fall apart when you get home or you pass out. And I was the second of that a lot of times, probably the first as well. But mainly, I remember coming home from college, especially my first year or two, and just falling asleep until maybe 10 minutes before I had to go to work. And then I'd get up and, eat something really quick and then go to work And it would just be, I didn't have any bandwidth left, for any more sensory input. And so that's another way that women get missed as being on the spectrum, because they mask so well. Well, talk to those who know them and know them well and live with them. And I guarantee you're going to hear and understand, wow, they really do have, they'll either melt down or shut down or just have to withdraw and, just kind of go under their covers and get a reprieve from all the stimuli that's coming at them, because we can't filter it out, at least not very well. So, all of this said, I hope that this helps you to understand women on the spectrum a little bit better, and that, to really, if you're concerned that somebody in your family or even yourself might be on the spectrum and you're looking for a possible diagnosis, I would say really interview the heck out of a lot of different clinicians until you find one, and also ask other people who have been successfully diagnosed and who agree with their diagnosis who they went to, because I think that that's going to help you greatly. Because like I said, there are far too many clinicians out there that haven't a clue of how autism presents in women, and the criteria that are used observing men and boys. So thank you so much. If you like what you heard, please click subscribe, and please feel free to contact me by visiting neurodiverseuniverse.net, or Anne, ANNE, at neurodiverseuniverse.net. Thank you and have a wonderful day.